Here with me today is Mark Evans, MBE, an experienced British desert and polar explorer, Executive Director of Outward Bound Oman, author of multiple books and a Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society. Mark has written and spoken about his experiences trekking the empty quarter and expertise on these sorts of expeditions, and founder of the University of the Desert, a project we will talk more about later today at our evening event. Mark, welcome back to the Anglo-Omani Society, and thank you very much for coming to speak with us today. To start us off, let's look a little bit back over your career in the Middle East. What first interested you about the region, and when did your relationship with Oman start?
Well, I'm rather embarrassed to say that I went to the Middle East for all the wrong reasons. Originally, I was in my mid-20s with no money in my bank account whatsoever, but a wealth of expeditions to the Arctic, across Greenland and the Northwest Passage of Canada, and which was great, but didn't put me on best of terms with my bank manager. So I'd gone into teaching for all the wrong reasons, because it was a stable career with the time off to keep doing my expeditions. But teaching took me to Kenya, which was financially not a great move.
Was this through the British Council? Or?
No, this was just teaching in British schools overseas, yeah. And so I ended up in Kenya, had a great time out every weekend in the bush and climbing Kilimanjaro, all these great things, but no money. So a job came up as head of geography and economics in Bahrain. And I hadn't got a clue really where Bahrain was, but I knew that, that potentially the salary was good and no tax, and I thought, well, at least I can work hard for a couple of years and then sort myself out and then reassess my life. And I ended up going to Bahrain. I absolutely fell in love with it, the culture. The school itself was incredibly professional, and so a good move professionally, but culturally, I could see people coming over that bridge from Saudi Arabia every weekend in Land Rovers covered in sand ladders and dressed like Indiana Jones, and sand everywhere in their hair. But for me, I couldn't get in. Saudi was forbidden. There were no visas. There are no tourist visas to get into Saudi. So I had 4 fantastic years in Bahrain. That was my gateway to Arabia. And then I waited for the geographer's job to come up at the British school in Riyadh. There's a very big British school in Riyadh to serve the British expat community. And so I managed to get the head of geography job there, and that was just great. I bought my Land Rover Defender and I explored Saudi from the Iraq border down to Oman, from the Red Sea to the Gulf. And every month we would have a monthly lecture like you have here at the Society. And I remember a chap speaking about a trip to Oman, and this was a country I hadn't really heard too much about. I'd certainly never been there. He drove his Land Rover all the way from Riyadh around. You have to go through Abu Dhabi, Dubai, down through UAE and into Oman, all the way down to Salalah. And he deflated his tyres and he drove along the beach for 2 weeks, slept on the roof of his Land Rover, and his lecture was incredible. I thought, wow, what a country, I need to go there. And so my first Christmas holidays in Riyadh, I went to school that day. School finished at 12, my Land Rover was all loaded up. I drove, it was about a 13-hour journey, because Land Rovers don't go very fast, at least mine didn't, and to the border with Oman. I crossed in to the border about 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was one little hurricane lamp with a bit of wood across the desert, and a guy behind a bit of chicken wire, and stamped my passport. In I went. I put the big spotlights on in my Land Rover, and there were no street lights. I turned off the road, got up onto the roof rack, got my sleeping bag, and I fell asleep. And I woke up at dawn the next morning surrounded by these incredible mountains just north of Nizwa, and I thought, gosh, this is stunning. Drove all the way down to Salalah and replicated exactly what this chap did, and that was the start of my love affair with Oman. So I'm still there 16 years later.
So how did Outward Bound Oman come about then? Were you approached due to the recognition you received from your previous expeditions, or was it a plan which had been in development for a while?
Well, it was a combination of the two, really. My gateway to Oman was again teaching at the British School in Muscat. I was doing a lecture at a hotel in Muscat, and in the audience was someone who's going to be here tonight, Andy Wood, who was the country manager of Shell at the time. And I think Andy's children had been through Outward Bound here in the UK. He saw the impact it had on them. And I think Andy recognised the contribution that Outward Bound could make to the evolution of Oman, to bridge that gap between the world of education and the world of employment. So Andy had been chipping away for a while, trying to get Outward Bound started in Oman. Sat through my lecture, poor chap, invited me for lunch the next day, and within 3 or 4 months we had a meeting of some of the senior British expat people in Oman, and we created a small consortium of investors who seed funded the charity for the first 5 years. And as soon as all the constitution was legally drawn up and I had the confidence to leave my teaching job, then 10 years ago to this month, so it was 11th of May 2009 that Outward Bound was launched in Muscat.
So can you tell us a little bit about what we're going to be talking about later? So the University of the Desert project, is it attached to Outward Bound Oman or something completely separate you've organised yourself?
Well, you know, the University of the Desert is. So my favourite book is called Koviashevik.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that.
No, not many people have, but it's. So Koviashevik is Inuktitut, which is Inuit for living in the present moment with quiet joy and happiness. So it's the story of a guy that gave up his life in California, went to live in a log cabin in northern Alaska, and just, you know, had this incredible life. And he would come south to mainland USA to lecture about his life in the wilderness. And none of the media on the front row could ever get a grasp of Koviashevik, because it's not necessarily a place. You know, Koviashevik is living in the present moment with quiet joy and happiness.
The state of mind.
I'm having a Koviashevik moment quite right here now. I'm quite enjoying talking to you. It's nice to be back at the society. So Koviashevik can be wherever you want it to be. And the University of the Desert is not a bricks and mortar place. It's a concept, and it's using the desert environment to promote learning. And so it can be in the desert, it can be on the top of the mountain. They're both deserts in the geographical definition of the word. So Outward Bound runs courses in the desert, but we also run specific courses called Connecting Cultures, which also take place in the desert. So under that umbrella of the University of the Desert, you have Outward Bound, which is there to train young Omani talent, and you have Connecting Cultures, which is focusing on peace building and dialogue.
Brilliant. So T. Lawrence in his 7 Pillars of Wisdom stated that for the ordinary Arab, the hearth was a university, about which their world passed and where they were heard the best talk. The news of their tribes, its poems, histories, lawsuits and bargains. By such constant sharing of the hearth councils, they grew up massive expression. So do you think this still rings true today, in today's modern world, essentially?
Well, I do, and that's one of the reasons why I've lived in Oman for 16 years, because you know, what I like about Oman, I mean, Thesiger considered the internal combustion engine as the end of the Bedouin people that he loved. That was it. It was going to change their lives forever for the worse. But of course it didn't. You know, the Bedouin embrace the best of what is available, and always have. But they always keep one foot in the desert. They've still got their camels. They've still got their goats. And it's the same with the Omanis. You still work in Muscat, but you know, you still go home to your family at weekends, and family is incredibly important. I employ 32 people now, 28 of them are Omani, and you know, family is absolutely critical. And what I love about Oman is that very thing, that you will find 3 generations of one family sitting around a fire on the edge of the road sometimes. Doesn't matter where it is, on a green park, under a date tree, in the desert. But dialogue is so important, and talking is so important, and family are so important. So I just think Lawrence's words still ring true today.
Have you ever sat around one of those fires with the Bedouin and spoke?
Frequently, yeah. That's where I spend most of my time.
Really?
And it's great. It's great.
So you spoke about, for the event later, about how it's going to help prepare young Omanis for Vision 2040 and regional peace building. Can you tell us more about that? Or?
Yeah, well, Vision 2040 is blimey, it's the result of a lot of work and a lot of thinking by some pretty smart people in Oman, and we are shaping what we do at Outward Bound to make sure that we help the government turn that vision into a reality.
So are you partnering with the government, or is this your own initiative?
No, we do. We work very closely with Said Haytham's team, and so his team at the Strategic Supreme Council for Planning, I think it is. We support them in as much as we can, and you know, when you look at 2040, you know, we're 2019 today. If you're a 13-year-old, 14-year-old kid at school today, 15-year-old kid coming to Outward Bound today, you're going to be a very productive, hopefully, member of society in Oman when it comes to 2040. So now is the time you need to invest to get the right ethics and the attitudes. It's all well and good going to places like China and Kuwait and asking for investment in Oman, but if people come and, you know, you're confronted with the issue that, well, Omanis don't want to do that kind of job, it's not going to work. So we have to change people's attitudes, not change them, but Omanis actually do have a very good work ethic, you know, as my staff demonstrated. But it's changing getting into the mindsets of young people that Vision 2040 is not going to be the same as Vision 2010 was. The government is no longer absorbing the masses, 50,000 young people coming into the workplace every year. Government can't absorb those anymore because it doesn't have any money. So it's all down on the private sector to do that, or generating manufacturing industry within Oman at places like Doha, which are absolutely essential, and the promotion of tourism to create those jobs is incredibly essential. So what we do at the University of the Desert, be it Outward Bound, is really to give those young people the key fundamental skills to make the transition from being a young person leaving education to being a productive member of society and performing at work. And the peace building stuff really just embodies what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs are all about. You know, His Majesty's focus is on dialogue and tolerance and understanding, and that is really what underpins the Connecting Cultures programme that is almost completely funded by the Sultan Qaboos Cultural Centre, and it's really Oman's gift to UNESCO, and really is a wonderful legacy that sort of embraces everything that His Majesty stands for.
So since launching University of the Desert, have you seen that kind of active change taking place in the youth?
Well, or
is it still?
It's hard to track. I mean, we've been running for 15 years, but it's hard to track. We've trained 13,700 people in 10 years with Outward Bound Oman. Connecting Cultures, we run 3 courses each winter in the desert, and so we work with just short of 500. But they're from all different countries. You know, there's only one Omani on each Connecting Cultures journey. You'll have young Iranians, young Yemenis, young Americans. So it's a mini United Nations going into the desert for 5 days. And you know, we're out there to discuss things like extremism and solutions to extremism, and what it takes to have the bravery and the confidence to step forward and say something is wrong, and it shouldn't be misunderstood that way. So it's hard for us to track what happens to these young people.
When you talk about such things, do you see in a lot of students maybe a change in mind over the course of those 5 days, or are they quite resilient in their stance from the?
Oh no, you see a profound change.
Are you challenging them?
All the time, provoking them, and but actually at the end, so we start with a diagram of communication. So there are 3 levels of communication. One is ritual, which is hello, good morning, how are you. Then we move into fact, which is, you know, Anglo-Omani Society is the society to promote British-Omani relations. Fact, so that you're on safe ground talking about that. But when you actually go into opinion, you know, the Anglo-Omani Society is not as good as the Saudi-British Society, and then you start you're treading on sensitive ground then, because people have different opinions. There's no disputing facts.
Yeah.
And so it's fascinating watching, because young people from the Netherlands, for example, come from such a liberal society that they won't bother with stage 1 or stage 2. They'll go straight to stage 3.
Yeah.
Because why wouldn't you? It's just the way you talk about things in the Netherlands. It's a completely open society. But if you're from Oman or Qatar or Saudi, you know, it takes a very long time to build up that trust and that relationship. You know, you're stuck at level 1 for a long time before you'll actually move on to level 2 and level 3. So we have these discussions on day 1 just to make sure that everyone is aware of who they're sharing this journey with for the next 5 days, because there's no doors to hide behind. You know, there's no tents. You're not sleeping in tents. You're sleeping under the stars. You're sharing camels. You're eating together, walking together, and it's great. You know, I was a teacher for 21 years, but those 5 days are the most powerful thing educationally I've ever seen. And we take young people aged 17 to 25, and you have to prize them apart at the airport 5 days before they'd never met each other, and 5 days later you've got to get a bit of wood between them to lever them apart, because they're absolutely flooding in tears and they've got to get on the plane. And it's pretty powerful stuff.
Is it purely kind of like dialogue based then, or is there other kind of like team building exercises which you do when in those 5 days?
It's a combination of the two. So there's an old Arab saying that you don't really know someone until you've been on a journey with them, and so there's a journey element. We don't walk very far, but we have what we call online and offline discussion. So when you're walking, we have what we call the offline discussion. So if you've actually got a question about marriage in Saudi Arabia, and you're too embarrassed to talk about it in front of 18 other people, well then that's when you're walking, you've got the chance to just walk side by side and have private, discreet discussions. But then we'll come together several times during that journey, and we'll have 2 Land Rovers out there. We rig up some shade between them, make a mobile classroom, and that's when we get into the meaty discussions. And cultural misunderstanding: is the media solely to blame? So that's quite a provocative question, and we ask people to look at that statement and stand on either side of a line. This side if you agree with it, that side if you disagree with it.
And then discuss.
And then discuss and make your argument as a group to convince the other people that you're right and they're wrong. And boy, you can walk away to Muscat for a couple of hours and come back and they'll still be talking. It's great fun.
So are they very much leading discussion then, or do you have like a kind of set kind of questions you plan to ask, or provocative statements you plan to make to?
Oh, we do. I mean,
or does it evolve?
We do have to. Well, you have to have the flexibility to let it evolve.
Yeah.
But there is a structure, and we've refined that structure over 15 years now. So it's a pretty slick, intensive 5-day experience. Which, of course, importantly, the last day of all, which is where you really pull everyone together to make sense of what they've experienced, and to challenge them to come up with what comes next.
Brilliant. Just for our last question then, what have been your expedition highlights over your long career? Polar or desert, I suppose.
Oh, I don't know really. It's lots of multiple highlights really. If I think about the poles, I would say overwintering on Svalbard, with 4 months of total darkness, that was just pretty magical really, with the aurora every night, and we weren't sleeping in huts, we were just sleeping in little tents and sleeping on, well, we were there for an entire year, but it was 4 months of total darkness. But and then I'd say in the Northwest Passage of Canada, being on a remote island searching for evidence of Franklin's expeditions, being surrounded by white Arctic wolves, 12 wolves, there's no trees, there's no shelter, you're completely exposed, and so that was quite an interesting experience. And in the desert, multiple really. Kayaking around the coastline of Oman, that was pretty memorable. I think our recent journey from Salalah to Doha through the empty water, that was.
How long did that take?
So the kayak journey was 55 days. The journey on camels was 49 days. But if I think back to Saudi, the journey that sticks in my mind is a journey from the border with Iraq to Mecca. And it's called the Darb Zubaydah, and it's a pilgrim route across the desert when people would go and perform the Hajj. And Zubaydah was a queen from Iraq, and it was only when she did the Hajj herself that she learned the hardship that people had to endure to walk to Mecca, and many of them perished on the way or got raided and everything stolen. So once she'd done that herself, she ordered the construction of every day's march, every 20 kilometres, a water well and some basic barracks where people could shelter out of the sun and sleep. And so she constructed virtually this road across the desert that goes for about 800,000 miles. It's extraordinary, and it's still there. And
did you stay in those very barracks?
Well, yeah, well, I slept on the roof rack of my Land Rover, but it's these water systems still hold water hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years later, and you can be driving through the Nufwood Desert, and all of a sudden you come across this green oasis, and you can see evidence of the old road still. It was all hand built and incredible, really. So, Oman is great. Saudi, equally fascinating, and what makes Saudi so fascinating is that there's no tourism. So what you have in Wadi Rum and Petra in Jordan, which is swamped with tourists, just across the border in Saudi, there's nobody there. Same rock carvings. You're so privileged, really, to experience it. And great.
Well,
So much more to be done.
Yeah.